Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're out here at Kahia Creek MX Park today for the next 3 days of testing at 3 different locations for our 2018 250F Shootout. Per our usual formula, we have this video for you guys that like it short and sweet. I'm gonna run through the pros and cons of each bike and our overall results. But for you guys that like the nitty gritty, all the details, we have a huge amount of that in the article on vitalmx.com. There should also be a link below where you can find it. In there, you'll find all the dyno charts, tech specs, all 7 riders' individual comments from each day and all their individual results, so you know how we came up with these conclusions. But for now, we're gonna roll right into the results, starting out with 6th place. Sitting in 6th place is the Suzuki RMZ 250. Sadly, this probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to anybody listening to this, as it has been at the bottom of our list and a couple other outlets for a few years now. Being that there has been no major performance increases with the bike in the past few years, it was kind of obvious it was going to start here. At the same time though, we definitely still put in our due diligence, tried a bunch of settings on to see what we could improve and if we could learn anything new about the bike. But in the end, each rider listed this as last place. Of course, the main reason for that is the engine performance, which is a huge key in the 250F class. The Suzuki just doesn't have what their bikes have. It's down a notable amount on horsepower and torque, and it's obvious on the track. It has some good response, low to mid. It signs off very early. You have to shift it a lot more than your 250 in the class, and once you ride the other bikes back to back with it, it just feels like it is 5 or 6 years old in the engine department. Competitive for its time then, but not now. And as for the chassis, everybody of course loves how it handles. They think it feels very neutral, very inviting when they get on the bike. Nothing odd about it. But the suspension also comes out as a bit as a problem. It's not horrible, but compared to some of the ground the other bikes in the class have made, it just feels really held up in the stroke. A lot of the riders, no matter their weight, were all going softer, albeit different levels based on how much they did weigh. Everybody was trying to get the bike to settle down. It felt very topped out, mostly with the fork. A few guys had the same comment about the shock. As we tried to soften up, we just tried to get the suspension to move more, make it more comfortable. A lot of the guys were able to accomplish that, but they still said in the end, they got working better, but they didn't get the comfort they wanted. Falling into 5th place is the Kawasaki Kicks 250F. Kawi actually did make a few updates to the bike after quite a few last year. This year they did some updates with the head to try to get a little bit more power. They did some suspension updates, new fork spring rate, a couple things. Now starting off with the riders really enjoyed is the engine. Not that it's more powerful in any certain RPM spot than any other bikes in the class, but it really comes down to how well it's mapped and how crisp it feels. All the riders really enjoyed that at any RPM, any gear position, they could just give a little whack of the throttle and they felt the bike respond. Nice raspy tone. It gave them kind of that race bike feel and it made everybody get a lot of confidence in the machine. Beyond that, where things started to get a little bit mixed came with the suspension, mostly with the fork. A lot of guys feel like this fork, it's not bad, but it's not as comfortable basically as the bikes above it. A few guys were always going a little bit stiffer on this setting. Since they went to a softer fork spring this year, it has more comfort, but some guys were going stiffer or faster with the rebound to just try to get more action and control out of the bike. A lot of guys were able to get that, but they still weren't able to get as much comfort as the bikes above them. Then coming to the chassis itself and the ergonomics, there was a little bit of confusion amongst the guys. At first when you sit on, when you think of the foot peg to seat height, a lot of guys feel like this is built for a smaller rider. It's a really good thing for a younger 125 or 85 rider to move up to, but then the handlebar height's kind of tall. Luckily, the Kawi does offer a lot of adjustment with bar mount positions, foot pegs, and a couple things, but a few riders still felt like it was a little bit mixed up in the rider compartment and some of them couldn't get totally comfortable with it. 4th place this year goes to the Husqvarna FC 250. Now what's really interesting in shootout season is we have 6 bikes, but 2 of them specifically get very closely compared to each other. Because the Husqvarna and KTM are nearly the same machine with just a few changes, a lot of riders would think they'd end up next to each other on the final order. But for quite a few riders, that's not the case because in the certain conditions, they almost feel like completely different machines. In our 450 shootout, the KTM and the Husqvarna have more of a split decision on which one the riders like. But in the 250, it's clear that all the riders lean one way as they all put the KTM above the Husqvarna, if not a few bikes away from it in their final scoring. Now let's start with why the Husqvarna is good. Lightweight, electric start, Magura hydraulic clutch, great Brembo brakes, an overall very aggressive cockpit, some of the best power output in the class, but that power is where things get interesting based on the way it's delivered. This bike revs quite a bit slower. It feels almost like it's got a heavy flywheel or heavy oil in it because it just takes a long time to get through the low and mid-range up into the top RPM where it makes a lot of this power. And unlike a lot of other 250s, even if you give it a lot of clutch action, it doesn't really get up through the RPM range quickly. So a lot of riders, depending upon the track conditions, this didn't always suit them. They got a little bit tired of waiting for that power to come on, and it made them guess what gear selection they were going to use and what line selection. It took a little bit too much thought and effort to figure out how to ride the bike at times. In the end, what cost the Husqvarna and pushed it back to 4th is not only how we compare it to the KTM, but also the next 2 bikes in the class, how close they are to that model, that just a few little negatives about the Husqvarna would push it outside the top 3. Most notably is also how people dealt with the suspension. They felt like they struggled a little bit more to set up this bike. Everybody said after a while they were able to find something they really got along with, but they felt like they had to make more changes to this bike than the KTM to get to where they were happy. Landing on the podium in 3rd place is the Yamaha FZ250F. Now this bike has gotten a lot of talk in the 250F class since it got really redesigned in 2014, and for good reason. It really comes down to the engine and how much different it is to anything else in the class. A lot of people even label this thing like a mini 450 because it just makes so much more low to mid power, both horsepower and torque, and just has this nice roll-on grunt that is unlike any other 250F engine. But that's not the only place they focused on, as it's able to pull into that high RPM range to be very respectable against anything else in the class. And in all, it gives it a very unique engine package that allows you to ride it a little bit different than the other bikes in the class by keeping it a gear high, which of course allows the suspension to work great. And then beyond that, Yamaha has coupled it with some really good settings on their KYB setup. Of course, the riders almost all agree that the fork is phenomenal out of the box with just a couple minor tweaks. Now, where riders get a little bit indecision with this bike is how they're able to adapt to the chassis setup. The bike does sit a little bit tall. They put a little bit extra weight on the front. Some people feel like they have to fight the balance a little bit or how big it is, and that's where the final decision really comes down. A few guys really like the bike based off the engine, the suspension, while a few do not feel it's quite as nimble as the 2 bikes we placed above it. In the end, it won some riders, but it didn't win them all over. Landing in 2nd place this year is the only all-new bike in the class with the Honda CRF 250R. There was a lot of expectation built around this bike this year because Honda not only came out with a big revision to the bike, they overhauled and went to an all-new engine architecture, going away from the unicam to a dual cam engine. The entire layout is something that Honda has not really liked to use in their motocross bikes in the past in the 4-stroke market. The big reason for this is they really tried to move the power from a low to mid bike they had previously to more of a mid to top end bike, and really try to make something aggressive that most people would want in the 250F class. We only rode this bike just very shortly before the shootout, and it kind of had us guessing how it was going to finish up because this engine is phenomenal mid to top. All the riders love ringing it out, but it does not have a lot of bottom end. It has a very dead spot off the bottom. A lot of riders said they were able to work around it with really good clutch usage or just a little bit better timing on their shifts. Moving over to the chassis, even though this bike is the heaviest in the class, everybody commented it doesn't feel such on the track, probably because of the actual engine being able to spool up so quickly and spool down. It doesn't have a lot of engine inertia behind it, so it's easy to guide it in and out of the corners. The balance is really good. This is probably one of the bikes everybody commented they could all find a setup on they like. And, which was probably the most surprising point, is how good the forks were. The Showa 49mm A-kit type fork, some riders even actually preferred it over the Yamaha this year, if not said it was right on par with it. All this coupled together for a bike that everybody said they were able to ride aggressive, hard, they were able to throw around, and it really surprised so many guys in the test. The only thing that kept it off the top spot is that lack of bottom end and how some of the riders weighed that in their overall decision. And what's really unique is it actually only got 2nd by 1 point over the Yamaha, while in Yamaha are nearly bipolar opposite bikes to ride, which makes this really even more interesting. Returning to defend its crown this year is the KTM 250 SXF. While not as dominant as last year's win on the scorecard, it still took a nice little solid victory over the Honda and the Yamaha with room to spare. And the reason being is none of our 7 test riders rated this bike off their top 3 list at any of the tracks we rode, which pretty much shows that everybody agrees that this bike is easy to set up. They all find things they like about it, and overall it offered a really good package that everybody agreed was worthy of taking the overall. This really starts at the specifications of the bike, with it being the lightest in the class, the most horsepower, a ton of great features, electric start, great brakes, hydraulic clutch, a ton of electronics that are usable, and just overall a package that's very easy to set up. Engine-wise, the bike mostly makes its power mid to top, but it has just enough low-end performance to kind of keep all the riders satisfied, able to carry a little bit taller gear with a little bit of clutch action where needed, but also at the same time you can really scream this bike section to section. Beyond that is a very compact, Aggressive, but not too small of a rider's compartment that makes everybody feel like they're on a 250F and they're ready to ride aggressive. And suspension that's also very easy to tune. The shock on this bike has a little bit quicker rebound settings, but works really well when it gets rough. It allows the bike to track really well no matter where you have it in the power band. And probably the only negative that any riders really came up with came a little bit from the forks. Not that they don't work well, just that no matter what the riders did, they said they couldn't get it quite as plush as the Yamaha or the Honda, but they all found settings with the AER 48 air fork that suited them very well and gave them a lot of confidence in the machine. In the end, when you look at the riders' opinions, there's very little that anybody can come up to complain about this bike, no matter where they actually ranked it overall, and it really shines through with this win. And if you really want to find out how we came to this conclusion, it's really easy to scroll down if you're on YouTube, hit the link below, or if you're already on VitalMX.com, just keep scrolling down and you'll see a lot of text. That's all 7 of our test riders' individual opinions and rankings on the bike, so you can figure out what all the pluses and minuses are of each machine. Like I said, while we agree the KTM is the overall winner, we do know that may not be the machine everybody's interested in. And if you really want to find out what might suit you, we really implore you to look at all the info, because our ultimate goal is to give you guys all the info you need when you're going out to buy your next bike. So we hope you enjoy, and tune back for more shootouts and more on Vital MX.